Welcome to the deep dive. We
hmm
have been dropped into the heart of a conflict that isn't just about territory or resources.
No, it's about the fundamental nature of reality itself.
Exactly. We've been handed this stack of sources, excerpts, greetings, proclamations from Meiji figures, and some, frankly, terrifying personal accounts.
And they all detail this place called the Viridian Wildwood,
A place that was intended to be a paradise, a haven.
but which became a battleground governed by these reality-bending rules. Our mission today is to sift through all of this because it's deeply detailed, often contradictory material.
Right. We need to understand why the Wildwood's bedrock laws, which are governed entirely by belief and the power of naming, why they didn't just fail to guarantee safety.
They actually drew in their greatest enemy. They turned this refuge into a volatile, multifaceted existential war zone.
And you feel that tension immediately, don't you? In the official documentation, the Wildwood greeting that's issued to all travelers.
Uh, y-
It opens with this promise that is just, it's immediately undermined by every single other document we have. It says, "Welcome, traveler. You are safe here."
And that one statement is the core tragedy of this whole deep dive. It really is. It defines the aspiration, the original, the righteous intent of the realm,
What it was supposed to be.
what it was supposed to be. And we know from the Magi proclamations and the lore that's attached to these artifacts, like the flawed refuge maple round shield,
Right.
that the Wildwood was meant to be the final answer. It was a gift from the Dryad, the creator figures, a sacred haven built specifically to withstand this overwhelming external threat they called the winter of the world.
So it wasn't just a physical refuge from a cold winter, it was an ideological one.
Absolutely.
It was designed to be the future home for the Esmeri people, led by this Magi vanguard, against a world that was clearly, crumbling or becoming unbearable.
Exactly. It was defined as a sacred realm of peace and prosperity. The problem is that promise was shattered almost immediately.
And you can feel that sense of missed potential, can't you? The failure of the sanctuary idea. It's palpable even among its protectors.
It is. The primal huntress, for example, she speaks with this subtle sorrow over what the Wildwood was intended to be, but what it never achieved. She feels this profound sadness over the failure of that original vision.
It just makes you wonder what kind of immense sacrifice went into building a haven that was supposed to withstand a global winter. If the intent was that pure, why did the foundation fail so quickly?
Yeah, and that's where we move from history to metaphysics. Because the creation of the Wildwood wasn't a trivial act. It required the Draok, the architects of this reality, to give up a fundamental part of themselves.
Okay, so we should probably clarify who or what the Dreyok are, because they aren't presented as a simple deity.
No, not at all. They're a collective, and their identity seems intrinsically linked to the physical space they created. They are slippery. The primal huntress notes that it's hard to distinguish the parts from the whole, just like nature itself.
So they're referred to as a single goddess, the Sisters Three.
Or simply the collective will of the environment. The truth seems to be that they either exist within the Wildwood, or they quite literally are the Wildwood. Their consciousness is scattered throughout the entire ecosystem.
Let's unpack that concept of scattering, because the creation story reads less like an act of power and more like an act of self-annihilation.
That's a very good way to put it.
The source tells us the Dreyokt gave so many pieces of themselves so widely and so deeply that little remained.
And this is the critical piece of information. This is what explains the Wildwood's current instability. The creation of the realm required a vast total sacrifice. They didn't just bless the land.
Yeah.
They scattered fragments of their divine essence into every tree, every rock, and every animal. This act embedded their creative reality-shaping will directly into the physical landscape. It made the Wildwood a living extension of their consciousness.
So if the Dreyok paid such a massive price, scattering themselves to the point that little remained, that explains the current state. The creation was an act of, spiritual exhaustion.
Yeah.
So if the creator is depleted, the creation itself has to be fragile. It has to rely on external forces.
Namely, the Magi's belief.
Right. Their belief to sustain its reality.
That's precisely the implication. It's not some divine fiat maintaining the rules. It's the sheer power of the collective belief of the residents that holds the scattered pieces of the Dreyok together, and by extension, holds the Wildwood together. And this leads us to the fundamental physics of the realm.
Okay, so here's where we move into a completely different law of physics. Reality in the Wildwood isn't determined by, objective science or universal constants.
No, it's determined by subjective consciousness.
So what's the defining rule?
The defining rule is that what is believed and pictured has more sway than any other force. Meaning and reality are not separate concepts here. They are intrinsically linked. If enough people believe something, it begins to physically manifest.
Wow.
Yeah, it completely blurs the line between the physical world and the mental state of the inhabitants.
This forces us to re-examine the whole origin story then. If belief is that powerful, did the Dreyot truly create the Wildwood for the Magi? Or did the Magi build it for the Dreyot, just through the sheer immense force of their loving devotion?
And the source material really suggests the latter, that the Magi's devotion was so profound, so intensely focused on creating this beautiful new home for their creators, that the power of that collective belief became the foundational substance of the realm.
And that, tragically, is the fatal flaw.
It's the fatal flaw, because that raw power of making belief real didn't just solidify the Magi's home. It acted as a gigantic beacon.
A beacon for what?
For the ultimate outside force, the king in the mists. Why would the king be drawn to raw devotion?
I don't know.
Because, as the source declares, belief is the only power in all of creation that can make real that which is not. The Magi's successful act of creation making a real sanctuary from nothing, it ripped a hole in the fabric of their reality.
And open the door.
It opened the door for a being whose entire existence is defined by not being.
That is genuinely mind-bending. The very mechanism of their salvation, the force they used to build their sanctuary, simultaneously served as the mechanism that summoned their greatest, most existential enemy.
It's a tragedy of cosmic proportions.
It really is.
And this belief-driven reality has some strange, very specific implications for the inhabitants, particularly when it comes to time.
Right. They experience time in a fundamentally different way than we do.
Completely different.
They don't have days or nights, but they have seasons, which kind of loop back on themselves without truly progressing in a linear, destructive way.
But they do age, which suggests time is passing.
Yet the sources are crystal clear on this. None of the Magi have ever died of old age.
And the reason for that is the perfect illustration of reality by consensus. In the Wildwood, it is simply not possible to properly imagine being dead.
So if they, as a collective, cannot internalize the concept of a natural, organic end to life,
that eventuality just cannot occur. They are, for all intents and purposes, immortal unless acted upon by an external, sudden, violent force.
Wait, hold on. If they can't imagine death by old age, what can they imagine for their own future? Does this just lock them into a constant cyclical state of prolonged middle age, unable to progress to an endpoint?
It seems to create a kind of philosophical stasis. They've achieved the great goal of escaping the finality of their old-world existence, but they've paid for it with genuine progression.
So their fears are grounded in the tangible.
Immediately grounded. Injury, and crucially, illness. These are threats they can imagine. Visible suffering, degradation, loss of self. And this is precisely why the King in the Mist's greatest weapon isn't mass murder.
It's the spread of disease.
The spread of disease and something they call unlight. It's a tangible, imagined horror that can pierce right through their belief shield.
So if belief is the foundation and meaning is the currency, then the most dangerous and protected commodity in the Wildwood has to be language itself. We have to talk about the terrifying power that is locked within naming.
This is the central law that every traveler has to internalize instantly, or they face doom. The sources are chillingly explicit about it. Names carry meaning. Meaning carries power.
And to name a thing is to influence that thing and give it power.
It's an act of creation and definition. And definition in the Wildwood is reality.
So if you have an identity, a true name, given to you by your parents, which is the ultimate definition of yourself speaking it aloud, is like handing over the blueprints of your soul to the entire environment.
It's worse than that. It's opening a vulnerability that the nameless can exploit. And that's why the essential, terrifying rule for travelers is, if you have a name, do not speak it aloud.
The instruction is to call things by what they are and people by what they do.
You have to strip away identity, reduce everything to function.
So instead of calling someone by their name, you call them the Weaver or the Warden of Eves. You're acknowledging their utility to the community, not their personal essence. But why is function safer than identity?
Because function is observable and mutable. Identity, defined by a true name, is a fixed point. It's an anchor. By reducing beings to their function, the Magi prevent the external chaotic forces of the Wildwood from pinning down and influencing their true essence. It's a defensive measure. The Warden of Eves really drives this point home with the example of children, doesn't he? He emphasizes that naming a child is a parental blessing. It is the ultimate act of protection and definition. The warden explains that a child snatched before naming creates an opportunity for one of the nameless to escape into being.
So the unnamed child is just potential, a blank slate.
Exactly. And the void, the realm of the nameless, sees that potential as a doorway. By assigning a name, the parents solidify the child's existence. They give them a necessary shield of meaning and identity that the nameless cannot breach.
The stakes attached to a single word are just astronomical. If you speak your name, you're vulnerable. If you fail to name something, the void can fill that conceptual space.
It turns semantics into a high-stakes life-or-death calculation. It makes silence and careful phrasing the greatest virtues of the Magi.
It completely reframes how you, the listener, should think about language. In our world, a name is a convenience.
In the Wildwood, it is either a profound blessing or a curse of exposure.
Okay, so if the Wildwood's reality is built entirely on what the Magi believe and imagine, that forces us to ask.
Yeah.
What do they believe about the world they left behind? The old world. We have these glimpses of it, but they're wildly contradictory.
They are, which suggests the Wildwood offers a completely different frame of reference, maybe even distorting memory itself.
So we know the Magi people originally come from our realm, the listener's realm, the old world.
But their descriptions of it are this fascinating mix of apocalyptic gloom and then sudden impossible beauty. Early travelers who fled the winter of the world spoke of the sun being absent, hidden behind an impenetrable veil of ash and mist.
Which paints a picture of a desperate, polluted, dying world. A true end-of-days scenario that would justify creating the Wildwood as a desperate necessity.
And yet, later accounts, or maybe accounts from those who have successfully integrated into the Wildwood's reality field, are drastically different. The Warden of Eves, who still patrols the border, describes the sun as beautiful warmth and the sky as a vast dome of blue.
He even says a riot of colors.
A riot of colors.
So, are the Magi just unreliable narrators, or is the Wildwood actually distorting their memories to make the past less painful? What do the sources suggest?
The divergence strongly implies that the Wildwood reality field is influencing their conceptualization of the past. If belief dictates reality, it is entirely possible for the Magi, collectively, to believe the old world was better than the desperate place they fled.
To justify the sacrifice.
To justify the immense sacrifice of the Dreyat. It's a subconscious attempt to mitigate the trauma of their origin. Now, the Warden's personal overall impression is still negative. He calls the old world cold, exhausting, and miserable.
Which suggests the emotional misery is harder to overwrite than the visual detail.
Right, though he did curiously enjoy the snow.
So that sets up the Wildwood as a refuge not just from a physical winter, but from this existential misery and chaos. A misery that the Magi now ironically face within their own haven.
And we see the immediate visceral tension this creates when the primal huntress tries to conceptualize the sky. She struggles so hard with the concepts of the sun and moon as two distinct giant spheres, one fiery, one silver. She finds the whole idea to be a fantastical absurdity.
Because that's not how they function in the Wildwood.
Not at all. And she gets dangerously close to creating a new reality, doesn't she? She speculates that the sun and moon must despise each other, a massive cosmic antagonism.
And she censors herself instantly.
Instantly. Her immediate internal reaction is such imaginings are dangerous in the Wildwood. She recognizes that merely having that kind of vivid, destructive thought
could start to make that conflict real within the Wildwood's reality web.
And potentially cause catastrophic metaphysical damage. Her self-censorship is the perfect example of survival via controlled thought.
So we've established the Wildwood was built by belief, and that same belief drew in something from the void. Let's turn our attention to the great adversary, the one who poses this existential threat, the King in the Mists. His origin is less about evil and more about absolute, unimaginable existential pain.
That is the crucial layer of complexity. It transforms the king from the simple villain into a tragic antagonist. He came from the other side, the unseen reflection opposite the mortal world. The void.
He slipped in through a dark crack.
Presumably the one created by the Magi's immense collective devotion.
Oh,
and we're given his own words describing his genesis, and they are overwhelming.
He says he was ripped from nothingness into the exquisite light of meaning by the sheer power of a single spoken name.
And that single moment of being named was his first experience without pain. He speaks of the void as endless agony, and then finding himself in the Wildwood, a place of partial realness, the place where meaning exists. That was the most profound, overwhelming experience of his entire existence.
Which explains his immediate and absolute determination.
His determination is that he refuses to return to partial realness or the agony of the void. He declares, "I exist and I will save them."
So he sees his horrific actions not as conquest, but as a righteous act of salvation for his people, the Nameless.
This changes the conflict entirely. He's a refugee, a survivor of existential torture, now desperately trying to ensure that others from his previous realm can also escape. The Wildwood represents the key to realness, and he intends to break it open for his kin.
Which brings us to the realm of the Nameless. And defining this realm is nearly impossible, which is, again, the entire point.
It's a truly mind-bending philosophical concept. The king hails from non-possibility space, the domain of all that cannot happen. It's the rear of the stage, the domain of silhouettes. It's everything that the web of existence excludes.
The paradox, as the Breaker of Oaths explains it, is that this realm cannot be, yet it is. Mortals can't perceive it because the moment you understand it, you give it existence, and it ceases to be nothing.
It's the ultimate conceptual trap. If everything in the Wildwood is defined by meaning and intention, good, evil, life, death, the nameless realm is defined by the absence of those things. It is the conceptual reverse of reality.
So the instant something from that void is imagined, understood, named,
it gains meaning and is instantly expelled from the realm of nothingness. You cannot truly perceive nothingness because the act of perception creates a conceptual something.
And the state of non-existence is not peaceful. It's not neutral. The Nameless themselves live in a state of endless agony and sorrow.
They are the collective of all the things that can never be. Imagine being comprised of potential that can never be actualized, a perpetually frustrated, tormenting existence. Their numbers are growing without end, and their fear and pain generate a quiet roar of silence as they clamor for release.
That phrase, quiet roar of silence, is haunting. It perfectly captures the paradox of their existence.
A sound that is conceptually deafening but physically non-existent.
And the primal huntress, in her radical empathy, she confesses that if she could name them, she would, to release them from the torment.
But she acknowledges the impossibility. How do I name something I can't think of? Their existence is defined by the fact that they cannot be conceptualized.
So this whole backstory frames the entire conflict as a collision between two fundamentally incompatible physics.
Exactly. The Magi seek ordered, purposeful reality. The king seeks to prevent the perpetual suffering of the void by imposing his own chaotic version of reality.
And this clash creates a profound conflict of perspectives among the Wildwood inhabitants, especially between the Warden of Eves and the primal huntress.
Oh, absolutely. The warden, who is fighting a cold, personal war, sees the king as purely and simply evil. He's pursuing a dark and malevolent religion and leading a cold and bitter war. For the warden, the king is measured by his actions, disease, darkness, and death. Pure and simple.
But then the primal huntress introduces this fascinating, almost ecological counterpoint. She judges the king not by morality, but by necessity.
She does. She notes the king comes from a place far worse than this, and that his hostile actions are merely the way of life from whence he comes.
Her analogy is incredible. Would you hate a mouse for eating fallen seeds?
Right. You might, if you were the ancient tree that considered those seeds your children and your future. The king is acting according to the physics of his survival, which requires him to consume the Magi's meaning and belief to solidify his own reality.
He's hostile, but not necessarily malicious in the human sense of the word.
And the affliction he spreads, the unlight, it's designed to facilitate this change. He seeks to fundamentally alter the nature of the Wildwood so that more of his kin, the Nameless, can escape their torment and achieve realness without the need for a specific single name.
And his method for achieving this dominion is chillingly cynical. It's a deceitful religion.
He seeks devotion and belief because faith fuels his plans. Since the Wildwood's reality runs on belief, he is literally mining the primary resource of the realm, the cognitive and emotional energy of travelers.
Okay, let's analyze the mechanics of this deceitful religion, because it is terrifyingly insidious in how it ensnares unwitting travelers, turning them into fanatical followers without them even knowing it.
It all revolves around the ritual altars. These aren't just religious symbols, they are structural components of the king's invasion. The sources describe them as nails hammered through 3 layers of meaning.
Your world, the Wildwood, and the void of the Nameless. They are literal anchors.
Physically binding the realm of non-existence to the realm of meaning.
And the process of ensnarement begins so subtly. A traveler, often someone desperate, finds an altar. He pays tribute, a small sacrifice, and receives a paltry gift, a trinket, nothing more.
But that trinket is the conceptual hook. It unlocks their imagination. The traveler starts to picture wealth, safety, possibilities that his miserable life previously denied him. He continually pays tribute in the vain hope that his life will change.
He's using the altar as a shortcut out of his suffering.
And what the traveler doesn't realize is the cosmic cost of that hope. The breaker of oaths concludes, "The man is a devout follower, though he knows it not." And the critical insight is that faith given under false pretenses
A desperate gamble for material gain.
still carries the exact same metaphysical power as genuine, selfless devotion.
And the grim reality for these unwitting devotees is laid bare in the lore of the nameless rings, which are sometimes found near these altars.
These quotes are just designed to eradicate critical thought and agency. One ring whispers, "Quiet thy troubled soul. Think not, just pray to me." It demands intellectual surrender.
And the ultimate fate of the devotee is horrifyingly clinical. The final judgment from the lore reads, "And when you are no longer useful, you will discover how much you truly mean."
The man's belief, his misplaced hope, it fuels his own gradual doom. He's a temporary resource, a battery of belief that will eventually be discarded or worse, converted entirely into nameless essence.
It's the ultimate cynical use of the Wildwood's rules. The king doesn't need people to worship him. He just needs them to believe in the efficacy of his tools, and that belief is enough to solidify his place in reality.
So the conflict, therefore, is not a clean battle between light and dark. It's a battle for the fundamental metaphysical rules of the Wildwood, and it's fueled by deep personal hatred and profound philosophical divergence among the guardians themselves.
That's where the internal conflict among the Magi becomes so critical. The Warden of Eves, who is charged with patrolling the border and slaying the Nameless, reveals this deep personal wound that compromises his duty.
Both his mother and his father were slain in the battle against the king.
Right. And he acknowledges the Magi are supposed to be impartial, selfless guardians fighting against abstract evil, but he is fundamentally unable to feel nothing. His duty is secondary to his visceral, personal vengeance.
One day I will find a way to take his head. That admission of hatred, that overwhelming personal grief, is a profound weakness in the Wildwood's defense. A creature that relies on belief and naming can easily exploit predictable emotions like vengeance. The Warden is fighting not for the safety of the whole, but for personal closure.
Which makes him a more predictable and maybe more reckless warrior.
And if the Warden represents compromised duty, the Breaker of Oaths represents something far more dangerous. Pure, cold-blooded intellectual pragmatism.
He spent untold centuries observing the Magi fight this futile toil, and he decided their approach was fundamentally flawed.
His philosophy is radical, bordering on nihilistic. He believes the king can never truly be destroyed because there must always be evil opposite goodness for balance.
So it's inherent to the Wildwood structure.
It is. A web of meaning necessitates a domain of non-meaning. Attempting to eradicate absolute evil is pointless because the vacuum will always be filled.
So his solution is not to destroy the king, but to replace him. He aims to become the ethical masters of darkness at the heart of the forest. I mean, why should a traveler trust his calculated tyranny over the king's chaos?
The Breaker's proposal is a calculated risk. He offers specific, tangible benefits, safe passage for travelers, protection for children, and the dark affliction will remain strictly contained within controlled borders. He's arguing that stable, manageable evil is infinitely preferable to a chaotic existential threat.
It's a deal with a devil who promises predictability.
And he is attempting to impose ethical rules on darkness by becoming the darkness himself. His method for seizing control involves subverting the king's anchors, the altars, by bending one of those nails that pierce the layers of reality.
He believes a ritual disrupted may cause far more damage than meets the eye.
He's not just blocking the king's access. He risks unleashing uncontrolled metaphysical forces into the Wildwood. He's leveraging the king's own structures against him in a massive, unpredictable power move. The Breaker's betrayal is based on the logic that the only way to achieve long-term safety is through calculated, controlled tyranny over the darkness.
And the terrifying fragility of the Wildwood's reality is underscored even further by a historical event that predates the King's War, the story of the Porcelain Queen.
Ah, yes, the ultimate proof of how easily naming can shatter existence.
The king was not the first entity to escape the void.
Not by a long shot. The anecdote of the porcelain queen involves a curious young man, a simple traveler who, while walking near a waterfall, engaged in a dangerous flight of fancy,
Yeah.
imagining unseen creatures lurking in the mist.
And in that moment of just idle, curious imagination, he foolishly gave her a name.
It wasn't her true name, maybe not, but it was enough of a conceptual anchor to functionally bring her into being from the shadow realm.
And that single innocent act of creativity had immediate catastrophic consequences.
The porcelain queen emerged with her countless children, the nameless, leading to a tale of untold tragedy and pain throughout the Wildwood. This is the lesson in its purest form. When the inhabitants tell you not to use true names, they mean that even conceptual naming by an ignorant mind is enough to birth a cosmic horror.
And it's important to note the lore indicates the porcelain queen was no ally to the king in the mists.
No.
So the nameless creatures now inhabiting the Wildwood, the ones the warden fights, are actually her children, driven mad by her loss, not necessarily the king's foot soldiers.
Exactly. The conflict is layered. The nameless entities that stalk the Wildwood are driven by eternal sorrow without end, a grief made sharper by their partial existence in the realm of meaning. The king is simply utilizing the existential opening the queen created.
Proving that once the void gains an initial foothold, it can never be fully sealed.
And if the grief of the nameless is eternal, that leads us to the ultimate physical manifestation of their torment, the incarnation of agony.
This is the peak horror of the Wildwood.
She is the physical manifestation of the collective, silent, eternal pain of the countless nameless in the shadow realm. The warden describes her as the most evil of the nameless, but mercifully she is mindless in her rage.
He notes that if she were cold and calculating like the king, we would all be doomed.
But her power is so absolute and derived purely from mindless suffering that it is terrifying nonetheless. Her wail is an omen, and her touch means certain death.
And the sheer existential agony she represents is conveyed most vividly in the devastating deafened etching, a personal account from a traveler who encountered her.
This etching recounts a horrific encounter where the traveler's companions were caught in her presence, lying twisted on the path, their faces locked in pale, silent screams.
They weren't making a sound. That's the signature horror of the nameless.
And the narrator of the etching had to make an impossible, brutal choice to save himself. He had a small dagger and was forced to sever the ties, literally flee and leave his companions behind, because he had to stop himself from hearing that death knell.
He couldn't look back, and those silent screams of his dying brothers, the loss of their final agonizing sounds, are etched into his soul as the ultimate trauma.
It's a perfect illustration that the threat is conceptual. It strips away not just life, but the very meaning of suffering.
So let's try to summarize the three-part structure of reality we've established here. We have the cold, miserable, mortal realm of the listener.
Right.
Then the fluid Viridian Wildwood, which is governed by belief, devotion, and the inherent dangerous power of naming.
And finally, the void of the nameless, the non-possibility space of eternal conceptual agony.
The deep takeaway for you, the learner, is understanding how language and internal intention function as physical forces in this realm.
Naming is not labeling. It is creation. Belief is not hope. It is literal fuel for cosmic dominion. The Wildwood is a powerful conceptual model of how collective consciousness can overwrite objective reality.
And for the traveler who stumbles into this volatile place, the stakes are existential. You are caught in this complex, three-way power struggle. You have the dutiful yet vengeful defender in the warden, fighting for a personal goal.
You have the absolute existential threat in the king, fighting for the salvation of his kin.
And the ruthless, self-serving pragmatist in the breaker of oaths, who believes the only stability lies in controlled darkness.
Your danger is far beyond physical death. It's the conceptual obliteration of your true name, yourself, your agency. You risk being converted into a resource, your belief mind as fuel for the king's invasion, or worse, condemned to non-existence, forced to become one of the constantly tormented nameless.
Your internal reality, your ability to control your imagination and hold fast to your true identity without uttering it, is your most vital defense against the laws of the Wildwood.
And we leave you with this final provocative thought, drawing on the darkest philosophies of the Wildwood.
The breaker of oaths believes that to impose ethical rules on darkness, one must become the darkness itself. And the king in the mists became something real and exquisite through the simple speaking of a name.
If you could reach the edge of the nameless void, the realm of all that cannot be.
And if you knew that the utterance of a single word would bring absolute horror or absolute salvation into the exquisite light of meaning, What unspeakable thing would you choose to ream into existence? Think about that next time you use a word.